We are studying Romans chapter 8, the GOAT, the greatest of all time. So if you have a Bible, turn to Romans 8. We'll get there in just a few moments. Romans chapter number 8. When I was a little tyke, I was about 4 years old, my parents took me to a Christmas tree farm. And my mom used to love to tell the story. I don't know, when you're a mom, you have these little memories you kind of remember about your cute little chubby little kids. And this is one she would tell all the time. So we went out to this Christmas tree farm. I was about 4 years old. I think my brother Ed was with me. This was BC, before Cliff. And I was looking at this mountain, this hill full of Christmas trees, right? That hadn't been cut down yet. And I looked up as I saw all these beautiful trees in the blue sky, and I said, this is God's beautiful world. That's it. And, at 4 years of age, life is beautiful, isn't it? I mean, it's beautiful. It's perfect. God's in his heaven. Everything else is okay here on earth. I have my toys and my food and I can go out and play. I mean, life is great. Life is beautiful. This is God's beautiful world. But if you live long enough, you realize when you start going to school or maybe you start going to work or something happens, life doesn't always stay so idyllic or beautiful. Sometimes life can start to unravel. A philosopher by the name of Paul Ricoeur said this. He said that life moves many times, or life is a movement from a sense of orientation to disorientation to reorientation. Orientation is when life makes sense, when life is beautiful. Disorientation is when your world crashes down upon your head. Life doesn't make sense. It feels like life is broken and nothing is working. That's disorientation. And then reorientation is life begins to make sense again and you feel home again, but in a different way. We see this quite colorfully in the ancient story of Job. I find it interesting to me that the oldest story in the entire Bible, the oldest story, is one of the most disturbing stories, and that's the story of Job. We can see Job go through these three stages, these three movements in that ancient book, that oldest book in the Bible, of orientation, disorientation, and reorientation. When we open up Job chapter 1, we find out that Job has it all. He's got a great family, he's got a strong faith, he's got a great fortune, he's got a wonderful future. As we would say today, Job was crushing it. But something happened. The wheels came off. Tragedy struck Job's life. And he lost all of his children. He lost all of his fortune. He lost everything, including his health. He was covered with scabs and boils from head to toe, and he was scratching himself with a piece of broken pottery. He had moved from orientation, crushing it, life is beautiful, to disorientation, where his life was disintegrated into dust. His initial response to disorientation was one of worship. But as you read the book of Job, Job cried out to God, why? Why has this happened? Why has this calamity struck my life? Why am I dealing with these horrific, dark, bleak, painful emotions? How am I going to make it through? And then we get to the end of the book of Job and we find out there's a time of reorientation when God restores many things that Job has lost. So there's some things that you cannot restore in this life, but God restored these things and Job experienced the presence of God in his life again. It's a powerful, incredible, I think, mind-blowing story. The story of Job. A story like our stories in different levels of one of orientation, disorientation, and reorientation. And the problem that I've seen so many, many times as we're looking at Romans 8 today is that when someone is going through a time of disorientation, when the bottom has fallen out of life, when the pain, you are feeling it every single day, and it's a journey simply to get up out of bed, someone will come to you. I assume that they're well-meaning, and they'll quote from the GOAT, Romans 8:28. But they're taking that verse out of context, and they'll say, well, don't you know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love him and are called according to his purpose? And what they try to do, in my opinion, is to put a Romans 8:28 Band-Aid on a Grand Canyon-sized wound, right? Trying to put a Romans 8:28 Band-Aid on a Grand Canyon-sized wound. Romans 8:28, one of the most known verses in the entire Bible. A great and incredible promise is embedded in that verse that we'll look at today. At the same time, that verse can be used out of context. That verse can be used in a way that makes people frustrated and angry instead of encouraged and uplifted. Now, I think it's clear to us that as we read Romans 8:28 and other verses, listen, all things are not good things, but good things can come from all things. All things that happen in this world, all things that happen in your life, in my life, are not good things. Tragic things, bewildering things, catastrophic things happen every single day. And when someone tries to use Romans 8:28 during a time of disorientation, it often breeds confusion. Because it seems like to me, as I have heard it, as I have felt it at times, is they're saying, well, what's happening to you is good. No, what's happening to you right now, what's happening to me during a time, a season of disorientation may not be good. And I would encourage you to deeply consider the fallenness and brokenness of this world. Things are not the way they're supposed to be. Nature is not the way it's supposed to be. Our bodies, our minds, our desires are not always the way they're supposed to be. Things are abnormal. And you have to also deeply consider the ferocious nature of evil. There is a dark side to this world. There's evil in this world. And when evil gets inside of some people and evil gets inside of you and me and we yield to that, that can produce horrific things in our life and in this world. Also, you have to deeply consider the consequences of free will. God has given us free will. We can use our free will in a productive way, and we can use our free will in a destructive way. But we can't have it both ways. Or we become robots, and love becomes meaningless, and life becomes meaningless. So the idea that as we look at our own lives, or as when we turn on the TV set or look at our news feed, that everything that happens is good and everything happens for a reason. Well, yeah, it does happen for a reason, and many times that reason is our world is broken and fallen. Many times that reason is that the evil things in this life really do happen. The devil is real, demons are real, and the fact that we have free will. And you can use your free will in a productive way or a destructive way. So think about that. There are, 8 billion people on the planet, and we have our free will, and we don't always use our free will perfectly. Many times we use it destructively. Take that 8 billion people using their free will over, I don't know, what, millions of years. That just snowballs into a lot of pain and suffering. So, I'm just saying that when someone is hurting, when someone is going through a Job-like season of disorientation, it's not helpful to take Romans 8:28, which is great, it's from the goat, but it's not helpful to use that verse at that time. Plus, I don't think that's what Paul's talking about. Think about Joe Bailey, who's a writer, and he said this, he wrote this after the loss of his son. He said, I had a man come to see me, and he began to speak words from the Bible, words that I knew that were true, but he continued to speak, continued to talk. And he said, I couldn't wait for him to be quiet, and I couldn't wait for him to leave. He said, another man came by and sat there, and he simply just listened. He didn't ask questions. He didn't try to explain my situation away. He just prayed a simple prayer and left. And Joe said, my heart was comforted, and I wish that he would come back. When someone is going through catastrophic loss, they're going through a time of pain or a trial, don't preach. Bleed with them. Empathize with them. Listen to them. Pray for them. Years ago, someone gave me a phenomenal book called A Grace Disguised. And in this book, an author by the name of Jerry Sitzer tells his story of how he processed this incredible season of disorientation. When he was in his 40s, he was hit by a drunk driver, and in the car was his family, and this accident killed his mother, his wife, and his 4-year-old daughter. And he writes about this in this incredible book that's so encouraging about what we can do in a season of disorientation and how we can use a time of suffering in a productive and a positive way for God. But he says this in the beginning of that book. It's a quote that I'll never forget. He says, the help it may bring to others, and his story of survival, does not justify the loss or explain the tragedy. My suffering is as puzzling and horrible to me now as it was the day it happened. The good that can come out of loss does not erase its badness or excuse the wrong done. Nothing can do that. Nothing can do that. And then he goes on to talk about how we can come out of a season of disillusionment and disorientation and pain and suffering, and how we can use that and incorporate that into our life, and we can see that life can be beautiful and powerful again. That's the good news. And that's what God does as we look at so many stories in this book and the Bible. God takes the good things, the ugly things in our life, and he can start that process of restoration if we respond to him and to his grace. We sing that in all the beach retreats. Something beautiful, something good. All my confusion, he understood. All I had to offer him was brokenness and strife, but he made something beautiful of my life. All things that happen are not good things, but good things can come from all things. How does that work? Let's look at these encouraging passages, these verses in Romans 8:26 and 27. Let's look at the verses before Romans 8:28. Check it out. He says, likewise, the Spirit also helps us in our weaknesses. So if you're the one that's going through a time of disorientation, you're in a trial of suffering and pain in your life, God's Spirit helps us in our weaknesses. For we don't know how we should pray for as we ought. But the Spirit himself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. That's kind of amazing. When you are praying for your child, when you are praying for your sick friend, when you're praying for healing and comfort, or you're praying for clarity and wisdom in your business or corporation, and you say, God, I don't know how to pray for this, and we just lay it out there, God prays for us. His Spirit prays for us. His Spirit intercedes for us in groanings that can't even be written down in words. So in our season of disorientation and pain and hurt and trying to figure it out and navigate those rough waters, we lay down our life and we lay it down before God and say, God, help me, pray for me, intercede for me. Back to the Bible. Look at verse 27. Now he who searches the hearts knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because he makes intercession for the saints according to the will of God. Yes. God's Spirit intercedes for us. He makes it plain for us. He interprets our feelings, our emotions, our thoughts in a way that lines up with the will of God. That's helpful. It's helpful to know that God comes alongside of us and comforts us with friends and family members and people who will simply listen and empathize and pray. And then when we go to our prayer closet and we're crying out to God, wherever we're trying to talk to him, and we don't know how to pray and what to pray for and what's going to happen next and when we're going to get out of this season of disorientation and enter into a season of reorientation, God prays for us. He intercedes for us in a way that lines up our prayers with his will. I don't understand how that works. I don't. It's a mystery, but I cling to the promise that that's what God does in our lives. Then Romans 8:28. Now we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. If we continue to love God, if we continue to live out his purposes, he is going to continue a redemption process and restoration process in our life. But he gives us a choice. How will you respond? How will I respond when I move from orientation, life is good, I'm crushing it, I'm killing it, to disorientation, life is crushing and killing me? How do I move to reorientation where life begins to make sense again? How do I move back there? It depends on how I respond to God. God, I want to respond to you in this time in a productive way. And God, I thank you that you're praying for me, you're interceding for me to line me up to your will. God, I want to listen to wise counsel. I want people around me who are going to encourage me and lift me up and give me wise counsel in this season to move me from that place of disorientation to reorientation. God, help me to do those things. And God does it. He did it for Job. He did it for Moses. He did it for Joseph. He did it for Mary. He did it for Mary Magdalene. He did it for Peter. He did it for Paul. He's done it for me. And he could do it for you. If we just stay in the game. Stay in the game. Stay in the fight. As we respond to God and as we wait for his redemption and restoration. That's what happened at the cross, right? At the cross, God takes a very evil, wicked thing, a bad thing, a destructive thing, and through the resurrection, turns it into a good thing, a beautiful thing, a redemptive thing, a restorative thing that we can experience here today. And know that life, though it's broken, though it's imperfect and painful, is beautiful again. All things. Let's pray. God, I thank you that you know our hearts, you know our minds. God, you know where we are in life right now. God, for those of us in a season of orientation, you rejoice, you celebrate with us. For those of us, God, who are in a season of disorientation, when life doesn't make sense, God, I thank you that even in this time of pain and in this time of suffering, this valley, that you are still with us, that you're interceding for us, that we might line up our lives with your will. Thank you that you are for us, God, and I pray, God, that you will lead us into a season of reorientation, where we can see and feel and know your joy again. God, we thank you. We thank you that you are for us, that your love for us, no matter what season we're in, is real. It's real in Christ. And God, I pray right now for those who need a church home. They need to stand up in a few moments and say, hey, I want to be a part of Second, or we want to be a part of this church family. Because God, we need each other in all the seasons of life. We need each other. We need encouragement, and we need to give encouragement. We need comfort, and we need to give comfort. We need to be served, and we need to serve others together. God, thank you for this church. And I pray for those who are here who need to stand and walk down front and say, hey, I want to make this church my home today. So God, I pray for families and for students. I pray for couples. I pray for young professionals and adults who need to stand and walk down front and say, hey, I want to join Second today. May this be their moment. In Jesus' name.